Good morning, everybody. It's day 12, and I have to tell you, it is insanely cold here. I am freezing, even in my nice warm house. I didn't even want to venture out this morning, but I already have twice. As you could expect, our starters are a little sluggish, but they're still looking great. And I will give you a peek and let you see right away. And then we're going to feed them today. And we're almost to the end, day 14, where we'll be able to make our lovely loaves and be able to check and see how they are in comparison to the ones that we made on just day 7. Let's go check it out. Let's take our starters out of their nest and see how they look. Here is a perfect example of how you can see that sometimes our gluten-free starters just don't double in size. And that's okay. Even here on day 12, we've got it. It was very cold here. However, our gluten-containing starter did more than double in size overnight. And our brown rice and sorghum starters, not so much, but they still have risen. And it actually looks like they have fallen slightly. They're not quite domed. And I think that's just because it is so darn cold here. So you at this point may have found that yours has risen a lot more if you're in a warmer environment.
And you can also see there's a layer of liquid at the bottom, and this can actually be the hooch. So if it has been sitting and it's ready for a feed and there's a layer of liquid like that at the bottom, most likely it's hooch. Sometimes the hooch in the gluten-free especially can separate and actually be in the bottom or the middle of your starter.
And I wanted to point out that my brown rice starter has a little heart that's formed on the side. I just love it.
Okay, so no judgment, but oops, I forgot to feed Susie this morning. So it turns out that my little mistake can be the perfect opportunity to show you exactly the difference between a young, a mature, and an old starter. And not to worry, if you ever forget to feed your starter, which I already know some of you have, you know how to deal with it now. We're going to talk about that right here. And here you can see Betty. She was just fed this morning and a couple hours ago, and so she has still not reached her peak. You can see what a young starter would look like. She's just started to bubble a little bit, not a lot of activity quite yet, so she hasn't peaked. Whereas Bob is already doubled in size. He's nice and active, actually more than doubled in size. He's nice and active. There's tons of bubbles and activity, and you can see this would be the perfect time to bake with Bob and create a sourdough and create a nice loaf of sourdough. However, Susie, our sorghum starter, on the other hand, is looking a little sad. She's now an old starter. You can see where she doubled in size, rose, and fell. There's still quite a lot of bubbles, but you can see that the top of that quilted pillowy effect, or like I like to talk about, the air balloon that looks puffed up, has now lost all of its air and its volume. It is much more pronounced. It looks like kind of like wet sand, and it's got a little bit, its consistency is not super runny yet. That's because it's very cold here. Like my house, I can barely keep at 19 degrees Celsius. It's cold, and the air just feels colder because we can't seem to regulate it when it's minus 27 degrees Celsius outside. So you can see that she's not that far gone considering that she wasn't fed. However, she definitely is in need of a feed today. But I'm just going to leave her until this evening because it is so darn cold. I'm not going to wrap her up. I'm just going to leave her on the counter. And we will feed her again later today. So then you'll know what to do if you forget to feed your starter. And remember, this is in relation to the age of the colony of microorganisms. So a young, a mature, and an old colony of microorganisms that are in the old starter. The microorganisms are starting to die off. Now use your intuition. If you have forgotten to feed your starter, you know what to do. You just don't know it yet, perhaps. But all you need to do is think about, is it cold in my environment or warm in my environment? That's going to help you decide what ratio you need to feed your starter. I'm not feeding Susie because there's no hooch. I haven't seen any hooch through the side of the glass, nor at the top. The surface is more pronounced pillowy effect. However, it's not as pronounced as it could be. So I'm just going to wait and see what happens this evening. However, if you forget to feed your starter and it looks like it normally does when it's really hungry, it may have hooch, it's really runny, and it has those sort of features that tells you that it is very hungry, then go ahead and feed. However, I find that if I have missed a feed, quite a few of the microorganisms have actually died off more than normally would. So what I would normally do at that point, if it wasn't so cold in my house, is that I would I would decrease the ratio of feed to starters. Since there are not many microorganisms left in the jar, it doesn't need as much food. So you could just leave what's in your jar and just give it a feed like you normally would. So if I had missed the night before feeding, in the morning I realized I had forgotten, I would just leave what was in there and add my 50 grams of flour and 60 grams of water, give it a mix, and leave it and let it do its thing. Or the other option is to discard all but 30 and feed it a ratio of 1 to 1 to 1. So just bump it back like we've done in the past when we haven't had as much activity. If you're in a warm environment, your starter would have gone through the food a lot faster. So you may at that point want to give it an even bigger feed. So you're going to want to increase the feed ratio, not decrease it like I had said in a cold environment. So you need to use your intuition, and you've got this. You can figure it out. If you have any questions and you've forgotten a feed, please just let me know. If your starter is happily bubbling along and is really happy because you didn't forget to feed it, continue feeding it the way that you did last night and just continue on as if nothing ever happened. But I'm actually glad I forgot, because now I was able to help you. If you ever forget, you won't worry, because it will come back, I promise. And if you want to choose to try to keep your starter warm or cool and control the temperature of that instead of controlling the ratio, just remember, if it's very hot in your environment, find a cool spot for it out of the sun, on a stone countertop, or in the basement or something like that. And if you're in an extremely cold environment, you could snuggle up your starter like I often do, make a little nest, or find a warm place or a hot water bottle. But just to make sure it doesn't get too warm, remember the ideal temperature around 25 degrees Celsius or so. So remember, you have a choice: either control the temperature of the environment or control the feed ratio. So in the colder environment, you want to feed it a lower ratio, like 1 to 1 to 1 or even less. And in a warm environment, you want to feed it a higher ratio of feed to starter, like 1 to 3 to 3. And remember, those are 1 part of starter to 3 parts of water and 3 parts of flour. So use your intuition. Once you understand exactly what's happening biologically, it becomes so much easier to figure things out. And we're in this together. So if you need help or you're struggling at all, please don't hesitate to contact me or contact our community directly through the comments underneath the post. I just know that everyone would be happy to help one another. And I believe knowledge is power. So let's help each other out and gain even more knowledge about our sourdough. We're in this together. And your sourdough starter is almost active enough to create a good rise with your bread, but if you bake now, you may result in a bread that just doesn't rise enough. But don't worry and hang in there, because by day 14, it will be ready and we will bake a lovely loaf of sourdough bread that you're going to love. And just below this video is this materials list, which has all the essentials that you need in order to bake your first loaf of gluten-free sourdough bread. So have a look and make sure you're all prepared, because on day 14 and 15, we're going to bake our first loaf. So I'll see you this evening when we'll feed our starters again. I hope you have a wonderful day.